What I'm describing here is what most philosophers would call philosophical realism, or what it means to hold a realist view about a particular domain. So one can be a realist about science, a realist about ethics, about mathematics, about religion, and so on. Basically, to be a realist about some domain is to assert that there is some formulation of each of these three theses that is true within that domain. But then it's easy to see what it would take to be an anti-realist about any of these domains. To be an anti-realist is to assert that at least one of these theses is false for that given domain. So you could deny the metaphysical thesis, you could deny the independent metaphysical reality of the entities that we're describing, or you could deny the semantic thesis. You could say that our language actually doesn't refer to these entities. Or you could deny the epistemological thesis. You could deny that we actually have knowledge of such entities. So thinking just in terms of logical combinations, there are a lot more ways to be an anti-realist than to be a realist. Any one of these combinations in the bottom here is a possible anti-realist view. This helps to explain why there are, in fact, many different varieties of realism and anti-realism. The intellectual landscape actually looks more like this. Within each domain, and there are others, we're just picking these four because they're so prominent in these discussions. You've got a realist tradition and an anti-realist tradition, and within them, you've got different varieties of each. I think it's helpful to have a few more concrete examples, so here's an example from science. To be a scientific realist about the claims of particle physics, for example, is to believe that 1. There is an objectively existing external world, and 2. Our theories about subatomic particles and processes make claims about this external world. So, for example, when we say that neutrinos are subatomic particles that are created in nuclear reactions, we say that they have a half-integer spin, that they only interact with the weak force and gravity, that they're electrically neutral, and they have a very small but finite mass. We want to say these assertions can be interpreted as making claims about the existence and the characteristics of objectively existing entities in the external world and the laws that govern them. This is how the semantic thesis connects to the metaphysical thesis via a correspondence theory of truth. And then finally, number 3, we are sometimes justified in believing that our theories about the subatomic realm are at least approximately true. So the way to be an anti-realist about particle physics is to challenge one or more of these 3 theses. Now, a common form of anti-realism in science is some form of empiricism, and that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later. Now, what does this look like in the case of ethics? Well, if you're a realist about ethics, or what philosophers call a moral realist, then you believe, for example, that when someone tells their kid that stealing is wrong, this moral claim, stealing is wrong, is the sort of thing that can be true or false, and that what makes it true or false is its correspondence to some moral facts of the matter or moral states of affairs in the world, broadly construed. Now, it's not so obvious what these facts of the matter or states of affairs could be that could play this role of grounding the truth or falsity of the moral claims that we make. There are lots of candidates. Utilitarians, for example, will talk about states of happiness and unhappiness as the class of morally relevant facts. If you're a natural rights theorist, though, you'll probably talk about the possession of certain morally relevant properties of agents, like personhood. Or if you're a divine right theorist, you'll probably talk about conformity to the will of God, and so on. And the final point, again, is that moral realism is usually committed to some form of an epistemological claim as well, that we're sometimes justified in believing that we've got our moral claims right. So an anti-realist about ethics could deny any one of these claims. They could deny that moral claims are the sort of thing that could even be true or false. They could deny that we could ever know whether a moral claim is true or false. Or they could deny that there are any such things as objective moral values or moral properties. And there are, in fact, many, many varieties of such views in circulation. Now, an important and very interesting class of claims for someone like Boghossian are religious claims. beliefs in supernatural beings that exist outside or beyond the natural world, beliefs in supernatural interventions in the natural order, beliefs in the moral or spiritual status of human beings, beliefs in what we can expect to experience after we die, beliefs in social relations that God approves of or disapproves of, and so on. There is a long history of debate over how exactly to interpret religious language, the writings of religious texts, but to be a realist about religious belief or religious language, like God created human beings in his own image, or Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, or the bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ during the Catholic Mass, you got to believe these things. You got to believe, one, that the entities described in these assertions have a real independent existence. There is a God, there is a Jesus, and so on. Two, that these assertions, that your language is making claims about these entities that are true just in case they correspond to the facts about these entities. And three, that we're sometimes justified in believing that these claims are true. So you could describe this as a literal or common sense reading of religious language. So it follows, again, that there are a lot of ways that you can be an anti-realist about religion. You can be a flat-out metaphysical naturalist and deny the existence of supernatural entities that could intervene in human affairs. You could be an epistemological skeptic and deny that we ever have any good reasons to believe the claims that religions make. Or you could have a different view of the meaning of religious language. You might argue, for example, that religious language isn't supposed to be interpreted literally. It's metaphorical, it's symbolic, it's expressive. Maybe it conveys important truths the way that poetry and other forms of fiction can express important truths. Or you could argue that religious belief or religious practices serve some important social function, but again, without being interpreted literally. At any rate, all of this is just to give you a sense of what it means to be a realist or an anti-realist in these different areas. Now, let's get back to Peter Boghossian's Culture War article. And I hope it's clear by now why his description of what he calls the correspondence theory of truth is potentially misleading or confusing. It risks confusion to label this whole package of beliefs the correspondence theory of truth, because only part of it is. The whole package is closer to what we've called taking a realist approach to science and to rational inquiry.